in the streets. But I think the big part of the way we trivialize humanity, we dehumanize people and roll our eyes at death, has to do with the lack of families. And you're right. Gen X, I think, was the first generation. The baby boomers invented a lot of terrible things. They ruined education. They made homes unaffordable. But they also came up with this idea of divorce. And I remember being a kid in 1980, and my parents, who are still together, would always have these dads sleeping on the couch while they went through their divorce. And I watched it happen in real time. And they'd inevitably marry someone just like the woman they left. I think it's a myth, the whole trade them in for a younger age. Rich people do that. Celebrities do that. The rest of humanity just seems to sort of get someone just like their wife. It's their type. And all you did was tell your children that love doesn't exist. Love isn't really important. It's not a thing. So why get married? And my entire generation has said, yeah, I agree. Love isn't real. I'm not going to get married. You know, I was just in with all these anarchists at this co-op in England. And I'm sitting down, I was talking about marriage and our exact same subject, which doesn't go well with, you know, the hippies. And one of them says,
bourgeois sexual repression, man.
Why do I need a piece of paper? Why have I got to get a paper? Why does a state have to sanctify my love? And I go, man, it's more of a gesture. You know, in business, I do this thing called a crayon contract where I have things like, what if I sleep with your wife? And I'm obviously never going to do that, but it's like, what if the apocalypse happens? Then what happens to our shares? And it's just a handwritten thing. It's not that legally binding. You know, it's not this thick with a notary signing it, but it's just us sort of having a ceremony and saying, we understand the parameters of this deal, signature. I like to prick my finger too and put some blood on it. And I explained that to them, and the one older one, who's never been married, by the way, is like, oh, I think it's a joke, you know, that you need the government to support. And then another woman was there who actually had kids and was divorced, and she goes, oh, I don't know, I was talking to Jen, that's her daughter, and she said, you know, after I saw it didn't work out with you and Dad, I mean, why bother, you know? I mean, why get involved? It just seems like a lot of misery. And I think she was realizing that her divorce had sent a clear lesson to the children, which is, don't get married, don't have kids, it's all a lie, love is a myth, just be a dog mom for the rest of your life, and don't experience adulthood. Great lesson, boomers. Thanks for that. Great work.
It's how you diminish a genetic population, is you make marriage ridiculous. You make marriage a piece of paper.
Yes.
Bullshit. It's not just a piece of paper. Just for those who don't know, I'll just briefly explain what marriage is. Let's say you've been dating a girl for like 3 weeks. And, you know, it's fun. She's fun, but there's some red flags. You know, she's got, you know, maybe 17 cats. 16 would be okay. 17 may be considered a little excessive. Something's going on. You know, she does wake you up in the middle of the night, ask you to pinch her hips, and is she too fat? You know, just a certain amount of neurosis, certain amount of stuff that might be. And so you go to your friends and you say, you know, here's what's going on. Here's the good, here's the bad, here's the pluses and the minus. Well, it's a couple of weeks in, so your friends say, you know, if you're having doubts now, maybe you can just kick this one to the curb and keep looking, right? So they're not, your community, your family, they're not that invested in your relationship. Now, a marriage, forget the government. Why did the American government get involved in marriages? Well, it got involved in marriages and started issuing licenses to make sure blacks and whites didn't intermarry. That was the legacy of the Democrats. That's why they ended up with marriage licenses, is they wanted to prevent miscegenation. Anyway, so what you do when you get married is you stand in front of your family and your friends and your loved ones and all the people who care about you. And the marriage is you basically saying this: if I try to leave this woman now, hit me upside the head with a wet fish and tell me to stay. That's all it is. You're just saying, I'm committed. Hold me to my word if my eyes wander. Hold me to my word if we're having trouble. Hold me to my word if I'm sleeping on the couch. Hold me to my word. It's like, was it Odysseus with the mast, right? You know, on the mast. He ties himself on the mast and he says, I want to hear the sirens. You know, the sirens that make you dive off and die on the rocks. And he says, I want to hear them. So tie me to the mast. And whatever I do, don't untie me, because I'm going to dive off to my death. And his sailors are like, yeah, fine. And then he's like, oh man, that's some beautiful music. You guys got to totally untie me. Forget what I said before. Untie me, untie me, untie me. And his friends, his companions say, nope. And he sails off and he's like, thank you so much for not untying me, because that's what you're doing. You're saying I'm there for the duration. People who get divorced, who think of getting divorced and then don't, the vast majority of them 5 years later are really happy and say, thank goodness I did not get divorced. That would have been a terrible decision. All you're doing is telling people your public commitment so they know where you stand, so they hold you to your word. That's all that marriage is. Forget the government.
You know, you mentioned heroin addicts earlier as a reason. I know a heroin addict who was divorced, and he's now been to rehab, and he's back, and he's telling me this success story about how he's got a girlfriend, and his ex-wife has a husband, and he goes over to their house, and they get along great, and they co-parent, and isn't that wonderful? And I go, no, it's not wonderful. You clearly are compatible. You clearly can be friends. Sex is only once every few days, and it only lasts 5 minutes. So you don't have to be that. It's not like it's an orgy every moment. So if you get along, you're good. And he was showing me that they get along, but that they're not together anymore. So the kid has been taught a lesson, which is love doesn't exist and don't stand by each other. And the evidence now that you're friends just shows that you could have done it. You failed. And Louis C.K., Kevin Hart, these comedians, they laugh about their divorce and talk about how great it is. And I go, it's not funny. It's a catastrophe.
Oh, I can't stand the people, Gavin, who, I'm such great friends with my ex. We get along so. Then why is she your ex, you idiot?
Exactly.
I love that job. That was the best job I ever had. I'm never going to get paid that well again. I'm never going to have that kind of flexibility. I'm never going to have that meaning. I'm so glad I quit and now work at a 7-Eleven. Why did you quit if it was such a great job? If you can get along well with your ex, why is she your ex? I don't understand. That was the best car I ever had. I'm really happy I sold it for $8. It's like, this doesn't make any sense.
I was talking to a German the other day, and he goes, sometimes I'll have my daughter for the weekend, and I'll drop her off at Sunday night, and then me and my ex will sit and we'll have a glass, maybe a bottle of wine, and just talk about, our daughter and each other and our lives. And I go, how can you not want to have sex with her? She's sitting right there. You got a buzz. You've had sex with her, thousands of times? How can that? What are you doing? Why is she your friend now, you fool? Why did you screw up? And we just shrug it through. And pharma is a part of this too. I don't know how many guys, they've broken up with a girl. They've gone on some sort of antidepressant and just sort of glided through it. They've on Xanax the whole time, and they go, whatever, she's too young, and I had already had more lovers than her, and I've already experienced more life than her. I get that she wants to move on. I had a buddy who proposed, and the woman said, no, I'm too young. She was 25. They'd been living together for 5 years, but she was too young. So she left, and I want to experience life. And when I hear that, I want to experience life, it just sounds like a slut. Like what, you want to have more penises in your life before you settle down with this? They're all basically the same, by the way. And of course, she regretted it, ultimately, tried to get him back. He had moved on, and they screwed up. And it was this myth in her head that women have to go out and sleep with tons of guys and be 30 before they think about getting married. And I think men acquiesce too easily into it. My other buddy in Mexico, Joshua, his young wife leaves him because she felt like she was too young and she got married too young. And then she sees him at a party. I've told the story 100 times. He sees her running in the bathroom. He follows her, and he hadn't seen her in about a year. She's got mascara streaming down her face, and she goes, "Why didn't you fight for me?" She was miserable without him. Fight for her. She doesn't have to be your soulmate, but she does have to be your wife. You can have a bad year, by the way. I've known my wife since 2001. We've had some rocky times. She's a liberal, vegan Hillary supporter. We've had our ups and downs, but we ride it through because we know in the long term we're going to be happy. And I got to say, I've been married for, I guess I'm supposed to know this, I think 12 years. But every time I look back on the 5-year married guy, the 8-year married guy, the 10-year married guy, he looks like an infant. I go, you don't know anything about marriage, me of last year. Every time you survive a hurdle, you're a better marriage athlete. You're stronger. You go from the bronze to the gold. And I can only imagine the kind of success that you can achieve when you've been married for 30 years. I mean, you're a god. And by the way, one other thing. This myth about it's steak every night. Tom Shalhoub destroyed that analogy beautifully. He goes, no, it's not the same food every night. It's the same kitchen. So you sit there in your own kitchen looking at your groceries going, ooh, what about this? What about shepherd's pie? But the sriracha on top. It's kind of a spicy shepherd's pie. That's a whole new meal.
Well, when I was a kid, my parents split up when I was a baby. And having seen what became of their lives, it makes that whole decision somewhat questionable as a whole. It wasn't like they moved on to some miracle paradise, because there's always this this grass is greener crap that's dangled, particularly in front of women. Well, you see, your husband is kind of stodgy and sometimes he's not emotionally available, which usually means agreeing and crying. But they say, oh, there's this wonderful, if you leave him, you will get a lovely little apartment down by the waterfront and you will end up with a wonderful affair with a young sculptor who is sculpted and has just the right amount of facial hair to look rough, but without actually rough while he's kissing you. And it's going to be a wonderful time and it's going to be magical and you're going to discover infinite orgasms and you're going to get depth and they hold this weird thing. It's like there's this old story of the will o' the wisp, you know, this thing that leads you further and further into the swamp because it's so pretty and it dances in the air and then you just die in the swamp. And there's this illusion out there that there's going to be this wonderful life out there after divorce. No, there won't be, because you're older and the only people left on the market are the broken, the shattered, the weird, the corrupt, the insane. You know, it's like the used car. Why is a used car on the market? Well, usually because people don't want it. I mean, because if it's a good used car, you hang on to it like grim death. So all of the good people are gone for the most part, certainly by your late 20s. All of the good people are gone and you are going to go out there and you're going to have to try and build some kind of Franken-love out of the detritus and broken parts of people. I mean, it's horrible. And there's going to be such ridiculous compromises, or they're going to have kids. Oh, I'm going to date a woman with kids because there's nothing better than those kinds of interruptions day and night, and some creepy ex who resents me poking around the mother of his children. So this kind of stuff. But when I was a kid, I remember very clearly, I grew up in an apartment building in London, and there were some really old school people there, people who'd fled Europe after the war and so on, old school people. There was a French couple there, and this French guy said to me, he said, and I don't know why, but I'm really glad, and I was a little kid here, I was like 7 or 8, and he said to me once, I have no idea why, he said, well, if you don't get married, you maybe get to date 10 or 20 people over the course of your life, and you'll know them a little bit here and there. Right. But if you do get married, you get to date thousands of people over the course of your life because you're both growing and you're both changing and there's new stuff all the time. There's new experiences. You get to know them as a girlfriend, then as a fiance, then as a wife, then as a mother, then as a grandmother. They're changing all the time, evolving all the time. And that really stuck with me, that there's this fantasy of variation or variety that happens. But when you first meet people, they very rarely give you their true self. They're usually giving you some kind of act. You know, like when you don't act the same 5 years into the job that you do in the job interview. It's like when you're a kid, that first page of your notebook is really nice and tidy. And after that, it looks like you just smashed a bunch of spiders with a hammer after a while. And so you don't get all of this variety that you think you're going to get when you date around, because you just date people's false self. You find out their crazy self and you both recoil like you just touched an electrical socket with a wet screwdriver. So I think people have all of these fantasies about what's out there, and then by the time they've blown up their families and gone out there and find the human wreckage they're supposed to stitch together some kind of happiness with, it's too late. And that is what the devil does. He promises you things and then only reveals the truth of the disasters you've made when it's too late to go back.
And by the way, there's also guys who don't get married that are in that same boat. I know guys that are in their late 30s, and they go, the single girls are in their 20s, and I can't relate to them. They don't know who the Fonz is. We can't have discussions. Sex is great, but that's, 5 minutes. And then all the women my age that I would get along with are married. The few that are divorced want to get remarried right away. So they're sort of stranded out there in the abyss, just like you say, led out there by the devil. And it's a terrible place to be. By the way, if your mother got divorced when you were a baby, which is infuriating, and I've heard of this a few times. It's too hard. We're not in love. You're not getting any sleep for the first year. How do you even know your relationship isn't going well? You're not getting enough sex? Ooh, sorry. But I think that woman has to remarry as soon as possible. She's morally obligated. People are mad at Patton Oswalt for getting married a year or so after his wife died. No. He's got a young kid. You got to get out there courting. Are you the one? Okay, because this one needs 2 parents. David Cross, too. His dad abandoned him when he was about 13, I think, and the mother stayed single forever. There's some blame on mom there. Mom, it's terrible what happened to you, but you got to find a new man. They always need 2 parents. Hook up.